Welcome to the deep dive. We are starting today with a question that really, it sort of defines the human experience. How do we, in a world where uncertainty is pretty much the only constant, secure a bedrock of unshakable confidence?
Mm. That's the real question, isn't it?
Right. How do we stare down real immediate threats, whether they're financial or relational or existential, and just refuse to give in to fear?
That is the ultimate conquest. Fear is.
Mhm.
It's probably the most paralyzing emotion we have. But the beautiful thing about the ancient wisdom we inherit is that we're not left guessing. We actually have inspired instruction for building precisely that kind of fortress in the human heart.
Absolutely. And today our focus is on one of the most beloved and I think powerful texts in the Psalter, Psalm
That's
27.
classic.
It's often called the Psalm of Unshakable Trust, and for good reason. Our goal here is a meticulous verse-by-verse exploration to understand how King David, a warrior, a king, a fugitive, a poet, how he managed to maintain this complete security despite just overwhelming chaos.
And we are drawing upon the insightful resources provided by the You Need Faith in Jesus team, which really helps us anchor this intensely personal text in its historical and theological context. This material clarifies that Psalm 27 resides in Book 1 of the Psalter, which is the section most dominated by David's individual struggles and his declarations of a deep personal relationship with God amidst, intense opposition.
The sources reveal something really fascinating here, a structural anomaly. The psalm doesn't maintain a single tone.
Not at all.
It begins with these verses of soaring, almost triumphant confidence. It sounds like a victory chant, especially verses 1 through 6.
Right.
But then suddenly it just pivots. It transitions into these raw, earnest pleas for help and this almost agonizing vulnerability in the second half. What does that structural shift immediately tell us about David's faith?
It tells us that true faith is dynamic, not static. I think that's the key. Confidence is not the absence of struggle or fear. Rather, it's the absolute certainty of where to turn when that struggle hits.
Okay, so he's not pretending the threats aren't real?
Exactly. He establishes his foundation first, then he brings his vulnerability into that established security. It's a roadmap, really, for moving from declaration to dependence.
That distinction, declaration first, dependence second, that's critical. Okay, let's unpack this opening segment because it establishes the entire theological groundwork for the psalm. We are jumping straight into part 1, the foundation of fearless faith, covering Psalm 27, verses 1 through 3.
David opens by laying a triple foundation that systematically just destroys the premise of fear. He defines God in 3 roles, and those roles cover, well, every dimension of human need.
He starts with that famous rhetorical question based on those definitions. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Psalm 27.1 KJV.
This declaration is a powerful, active statement of identification. It's not just that God had light or provides salvation, it's that God is these things to David.
So it's about identity and not just function.
Yes. Let's break down that triumvirate, starting with light.
If God is his light, how does that relate to overcoming fear in the physical and emotional wildernesses of our modern lives?
Well, think about the moment David might have written this. He spent years in darkness, literally hiding in caves, constantly fleeing from Saul, facing betrayal, and navigating all this political confusion.
Right.
Darkness, whether it's literal or spiritual, breeds confusion, despair, and fundamentally fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
What's lurking just out of sight. The source notes we reviewed from the You Need Faith in Jesus team really highlight that light means God dispels that ambiguity. He illuminates the path and gives moral clarity.
So when someone listening is facing a huge, complex decision, a career change, a health crisis, a relational challenge, and they feel that paralyzing fog declaring God as their light is, it's asking him to provide immediate clarity.
Exactly. It's asking for directional assurance. It means we don't have to stumble through the circumstances based only on human logic or, a fear-driven reaction. David is saying, when I look at my situation, I don't see mere chaos. I see the path illuminated by divine wisdom.
And that finds its fulfillment later on.
It absolutely does. This declaration finds its ultimate fulfillment when Jesus calls himself the light of the world, promising in John chapter 8, verse 12, I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. It's a timeless assurance.
Okay, the second title is salvation. Now, that word carries enormous weight, particularly for spiritual deliverance, but in David's context, what did salvation mean day to day?
In the Psalms, salvation, which is Yeshua in Hebrew, is incredibly comprehensive. It means rescue. It means physical deliverance from immediate enemies, strategic safety in battle, and recovery from sickness, all alongside the deeper spiritual redemption.
So really practical stuff.
Very practical. Think of Goliath or his repeated narrow escapes from Saul's spear. God was his active rescuer, always pulling him out of trouble.
So declaring God as salvation isn't just a theological nod. It's a current acknowledgement that God is actively intervening in your life right now.
Precisely. It secures the past, the present, and the future. It's the constant knowledge that whatever the pit, God has the power and the willingness to lift him up. And that leads us to the third declaration, strength or stronghold.
The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? I mean, that is the ultimate defensive statement.
It is. It's the secure fortress. If God is the strength of David's life, it implies two things. First, that David's own internal resources are insufficient. He needs external divine fortification.
He's admitting his own weakness.
Yes, and second, that this fortification is utterly immovable. The Hebrew term implies a secure, unshakable fortress or bulwark. So David is not trusting in his own armor or his political alliances or the size of his palace guard.
None of that.
No, he's trusting in the God who is his constant, immovable defense against both visible and invisible attacks.
The beautiful thing about that structure-light salvation strength is that it covers all the bases. Intellectual confusion is covered by light, physical danger by salvation, and that internal vulnerability by strength. It basically renders fear illogical, just as David concludes.
Yes, the consequence of possessing the light, the rescuer, and the fortress of the universe is that fear loses its premise. And David immediately moves from this theological assertion to test it against a terrifying, real-world example in the next two verses.
He doesn't mince words. When the wicked, even mine enemies and my foes, came upon me to eat up my flesh, they stumbled and fell. Psalm 27.2 KJV.
The visceral imagery is just striking. David paints his enemies not just as soldiers, but as savage, ravenous beasts, the kind of menacing threat that seeks total annihilation.
Eat up my flesh. That's intense.
It is. They came to consume his very substance, his resources, his life. And this refers to the psychological, the physical, and the political assaults he endured.
We can connect that to modern anxieties, can't we? When financial disaster looms or a health diagnosis feels like it's consuming you, it feels like something is trying to eat up your flesh, to take everything you are.
Absolutely. It's that feeling of being hunted, of external forces trying to consume your stability. But notice where David's confidence is rooted. It's an historical, proven fact. They stumbled and fell.
Ah, so he's looking back.
He is leveraging memory as an active antidote to current anxiety. He is telling himself and us, I know what God did before, so I know what he can and will do now. God has caused his enemies time and again to trip over their own evil intentions.
That's the principle of retrospective faith, using yesterday's miracle to fortify today's battle. And this realization culminates in that incredible declaration in Psalm 27, verse 3, KJV. Though an host should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war should rise against me, in this will I be confident.
He moves from specific past examples to hypothetical future calamities.
Yeah.
He escalates the threat exponentially. An entire army laying siege is, that's the definition of an overwhelming threat, total encirclement, guaranteed suffering, and probable defeat.
Right.
Yet his heart remains unfazed.
Yeah. How does one achieve that level of emotional and spiritual stability? It seems to transcend basic optimism.
It speaks to an absolute confidence that his personal safety is secondary to God's sovereignty. The resources provided by the You Need Faith in Jesus team emphasize that this confidence isn't bravado. It's rooted in the knowledge that the Lord, his strength, is greater than any composite threat.
So it's a matter of scale.
Exactly. David knows that no matter how organized or numerous or powerful the opposition, whether it's an army, an economic collapse, or political persecution, the secure fortress is larger than the siege.
This first section provides, then, a crucial foundational understanding for anyone listening. When anxiety or fear threatens to overwhelm us, the actionable step isn't to try to muster up courage on our own, but to actively counter the threat by declaring God's role.
Precisely. The instruction from the You Need Faith in Jesus team materials is very clear. When fear attempts to define your reality, you must define your God. Actively apply these three names. When you are confused, ask for light. When you feel endangered, claim salvation. When you feel weak, rest in his strength. This actively puts the principle of trusting God with all your heart into practice, which is the necessary precursor for the stunning pivot David makes next.
Okay, let's look at that pivot because this is where David steps away from the noise of the battlefield and reveals the secret power source behind his courage. Why is he so confident in a siege? Well, because of his single-minded desire. This brings us to part 2, the one thing desire, covering Psalm 27, verses 4 through 6.
This is truly the gravitational center of the entire psalm. This is where David confesses his central passion. It is the spiritual discipline that makes the military victory he just talked about in verse 3 even possible.
He writes in Psalm 27, verse 4, KJV, "One thing have I desired of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord, and to inquire in his temple."
The weight falls entirely on that phrase, one thing. In a life where David could have desired anything, vengeance on Saul, lasting wealth, military conquest, political stability, his singular priority, the thing he relentlessly seeks after, is constant, unbroken fellowship with God.
That implies a tremendous simplification of priorities.
A radical one. Let's break down the components of that one thing. First, he desires to dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life.
What does that mean, practically?
Well, the source material clarifies that David wasn't seeking to become, a literal janitor in the tabernacle. As king, he likely couldn't permanently reside there anyway. Dwelling here means sustained, intimate communion. It's a longing for proximity, for the spiritual safety and satisfaction found only in the continual presence of the living God. It's choosing the eternal over the temporal.
And the purpose of this dwelling is twofold: to behold the beauty of the Lord, and to inquire in his temple. Let's start with beholding the beauty. What does that involve?
It's a profound spiritual act. It's gazing upon the moral, ethical, and relational perfection of God's character, his faithfulness, his unwavering loving kindness, his righteousness, his power. David finds his ultimate satisfaction not in what God provides him, the salvation or the strength, but in who God intrinsically is.
It's an appreciation of holiness itself.
Yes, and this is a crucial distinction. Those who seek God's hand for provision are easily shaken. Those who seek God's face for beauty are unshakable.
I see. And to inquire in his temple connects this spiritual appreciation back to practical guidance.
Yes, inquire means to actively seek his wisdom, his instruction, and his direction in life, particularly during times of crisis, which were, constant for David. It is an act of worshipful submission that acknowledges that only God has the blueprint for his life.
The notes suggest a strong parallel here to the spiritual focus we see in the New Testament.
Absolutely. We mentioned Paul earlier. This truly mirrors the Apostle Paul's relentless, single-minded pursuit of Christ. In Philippians chapter 3, verses 13 and 14, Paul declares that he focuses on this one thing I do, pressing toward the mark of the high calling.
So spiritual leaders across the covenants confirm this.
Yes, that the central defining passion of a secure life must be intimate knowledge of and fellowship with the divine. If our priorities are scattered across a dozen different spheres, we will lack the strengths David described in verse 3. But if our desire is unified, the resulting stability is total.
And what immediately follows this radical focus is the promise of absolute security. David outlines the benefit of the one thing in Psalm 27, verse 5, KJV. "For in the time of trouble he shall hide me in his pavilion, in the secret of his tabernacle shall he hide me, he shall set me up upon a rock."
This verse is pure poetry of refuge. Because David prioritizes God's presence, he receives protection that is utterly intimate and impenetrable. The imagery of the pavilion, or the secret of his tabernacle, speaks of a hidden inner dwelling. It's a place of intimacy and refuge that's completely unavailable to outsiders or enemies.
So even when he's surrounded by war, when the host has encamped against me, he can access a secure, protected inner space.
Exactly. Even when physical enemies surround him spiritually, he is untouchable. God doesn't always remove the trouble, but he always provides a secret hiding place in the trouble.
And once hidden, David is lifted up.
He set upon a rock, a place of absolute, stable elevation. This metaphor connects beautifully to Psalm 40, verse 2. He brought me up also out of a horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock, and established my goings. Security is not found in fleeing the field, but in resting on the rock God has provided within the field.
And that security, that position on the rock, it leads to the anticipated triumph described in verse 6.
It's a declaration of certain victory. "And now shall mine head be lifted up above mine enemies round about me. Therefore will I offer in his tabernacle sacrifices of joy. I will sing, yea, I will sing praises unto the Lord." Psalm 27.6, KJV.
He is so certain of this outcome that he's celebrating before the battle is even technically won. His head shall be lifted up. It's a foregone conclusion.
The security out in verse 5 assures the triumph described in verse 6. David is affirming that he will not be humiliated. He will be vindicated. But the response is crucial. It's not pride or vengeance against his enemies.
Yeah.
It's immediate, joyful worship. David promises to offer sacrifices of joy and sing praises. This underscores a foundational truth of faith. Praise is the indispensable natural outflow of security found only in God's presence.
That leads us to the practical application of this profound section, which is all about the prioritization of desire. If we find our hearts frequently disturbed by fear, how does David's one thing challenge us?
The actionable step, which is emphasized clearly by the resources from the UNFIJ in Jesus team, is to ruthlessly examine your primary desire. Many of us are anxious because we prioritize the effects of God. Safety, comfort, financial ease over the source of those effects, which is God himself.
Seeking the gift over the giver.
Exactly. David teaches that if fellowship with God, dwelling in his truth and beholding his character is prioritized, then security, strength, and salvation follow naturally. If we seek the gift more than the giver, we fail. If we seek the giver, the gifts become secondary and non-essential to our core stability.
That is a deep principle for navigating a consumer-driven culture. Now let's tackle that radical shift in tone. David has just delivered this ironclad declaration of confidence and security. Why, then, does he suddenly break into an urgent, almost desperate prayer? This transition is so vital for understanding that faith is messy. This is part 3, the honesty of the plea and God's assurance, covering Psalm 27, verses 7 through 10.
This is where David demonstrates that real faith is not stoicism. Confidence is not the suppression of feeling. It is the commitment to channel those feelings directly to the source of confidence. He acknowledges the reality. He is struggling, and he needs God's immediate attention.
He launches right into the prayer in Psalm 27, verse 7, KJV. Hear, O Lord, when I cry with my voice. Have mercy also upon me and answer me. The confident king suddenly sounds like a desperate man at the end of his rope.
He transitions instantly from describing God's perfection to begging for God's attention and mercy. But even in this urgency, his prayer is highly disciplined. It's not a complaint. It is a direct, responsive action to God's standing invitation for dialogue.
That dialogue is captured so powerfully in verse 8.
When thou saidst, seek ye my face, my heart said unto thee, thy face, Lord, will I seek. Psalm 27.8 KJV. This is just a beautiful model of responsive faith. God initiates the invitation, seek ye my face, meaning seek my favor, my presence, my fellowship. And David's heart responds with immediate joyful obedience. It's not forced duty. It's a deep, innate desire driving the prayer.
Even the most confident believer still needs that constant back and forth.
Always.
Okay.
That intimate dialogue. But immediately, the raw human vulnerability surfaces. David's true existential fear, a fear greater than any army, is that God might abandon him.
Yes, his greatest dread is separation from that presence he just described as the one thing. Look at Psalm 27, verse 9, KJV. Hide not thy face far from me. Put not thy servant away in anger. Thou hast been my help. Leave me not, neither forsake me, O God of my salvation.
David's panic is centered on the possibility that God might hide not thy face, essentially cutting off that fellowship. For him, that is the ultimate disaster.
It is.
It is the moment where theory meets reality. He appeals to God's track record, thou hast been my help, as the basis for asking for present endurance. He is reminding God, and more importantly, reminding himself, of past faithfulness. The sources we consulted highlight that this is where faith truly matures, in the tension between intellectually knowing God is faithful and emotionally feeling utterly afraid of abandonment.
So faith means clinging to what you know when you can't feel it.
Exactly. Clinging to the known character of God when his immediate presence seems distant.
This fear of abandonment is then answered with perhaps the most tender, rock-solid assurance found in the entire Psalter, the ultimate analogy of commitment in verse 10.
Psalm 27, verse 10, KJV, uses the deepest, most foundational human relationship to stress God's unbreakable commitment.
Oh.
When my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up.
That is a radical, almost shocking statement. David uses the analogy of parental love, the one human relationship we instinctively believe is unconditional and non-negotiable, and asserts that even if that bond fails, God's commitment is exponentially stronger and more certain.
It speaks to the utter reliability of divine commitment over human affection. Parental love is fragile. It can be marred by human failure, incapacity, or even cruelty. But God's love is eternal and certain. The notes we reviewed connect this assurance to the incredible promise in Isaiah chapter 49, verse 15, where God says, "Can a woman forget her sucking child, that she should not have compassion on the son of her womb?" Yea, they may forget, yet will I not forget thee.
So God promises to take us up, to adopt us, care for us, and provide the absolute security that no earthly bond can guarantee. That is immense comfort.
It's the ultimate comfort for anyone who has experienced deep rejection, loneliness, or relational trauma. The actionable step here is to internalize this verse as a personal promise. If you are defined by who rejected you, a parent, a spouse, a friend, you are building your identity on shifting sand. But this verse asserts that God's commitment is the secure foundation. You are adopted, eternally cared for, and absolutely held by the Creator.
The instability of earthly love cannot negate the stability of divine love.
Exactly. That analysis really deepens the transition from desperate plea to renewed stability. David secures his heart, and now he is ready for instruction, which leads us to the final pragmatic block of the psalm. This is part 4, guidance amidst hostility and the command to wait, covering Psalm 27, verses 11 through 14.
This section reveals a really mature faith. David isn't just asking for a magical helicopter rescue from his problems. He's asking for instruction on how to conduct himself right in the middle of the mess. He realizes that how he behaves is just as important as what happens to him.
Why is seeking guidance or instruction more crucial than immediate deliverance when you're under extreme duress?
That's the key question.
Because David knew that righteous conduct and integrity are the highest form of defense, particularly when his enemies were political and moral adversaries. He prays in Psalm 27, verse 11, KJV, "Teach me thy way, O Lord, and lead me in a plain path because of mine enemies."
He asks for God's way and a plain path. That phrase, plain path, suggests a straight, level, righteous course of conduct, avoiding moral pitfalls. Why does he specifically request this? Because of his enemies.
Because of the watching world. The enemies he describes aren't just physically threatening him, they are trying to assassinate his character. Verse 12 clarifies this danger. "Deliver me not over unto the will of mine enemies, for false witnesses are risen up against me, and such as breathe out cruelty." Psalm 47.2 KJV.
These false witnesses are watching him like hawks. They are waiting for him to step off that straight path, to commit one moral mistake, so they can use that failure as evidence against him and, crucially, against the integrity of the God he serves.
Exactly. They are looking for a scandal. The enemies are described as those who breathe out cruelty. Their very existence is characterized by malice and the desire to inflict pain. David understands that living righteously is a form of profound protection. If he walks the clear, straight path, he gives his enemies no legitimate reason to criticize his moral conduct. He asking God to prevent him from giving them ammunition.
The knowledge shared by the UNFIJ in Jesus team emphasizes that this connection, integrity, honoring God's name is vital, especially for those in positions of public scrutiny.
It is a profound, actionable step. When we face professional pressure, difficult relationships, or public scrutiny, our primary prayer shouldn't be "strike my enemies down," but "give me clarity and integrity." Ask for instruction on God's will and direction, ensuring our conduct leaves no room for legitimate criticism. This proactive defense preserves our testimony and honors God's reputation in the world.
It's so interesting that immediately after praying for integrity under scrutiny, David makes this profoundly honest confession about what sustains him during the waiting period. He refers back to being on the brink of despair.
This is the moment of raw vulnerability that makes the triumph of the end so meaningful. Psalm 27, verse 13, KJV. "I had fainted, unless I had believed to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living."
Fainted implies not just exhaustion, but losing all hope, collapsing in utter despair. David is confessing he was right there on the very edge of spiritual collapse. What pulled him back?
A singular, active belief. It wasn't just an intellectual concept, but an absolute conviction in God's present goodness, that he would experience the Lord's favor and provision in the land of the living here and now, not just in some distant heaven.
So it's faith for today.
Faith in God's goodness today is the lifeline that pulls us from despair. It turns future hope into present endurance. David had to actively choose to look forward, believing that the promise of the goodness of God was still applicable while he was besieged.
This sets the stage for the final, concluding command, the ultimate distillation of the entire Psalm's instruction, directed both inward and outward.
Psalm 27, verse 14, KJV. "Wait on the Lord. Be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thine heart." Wait, I say, on the Lord.
The repetition of the command, "wait on the Lord," really emphasizes its absolute necessity. What does David mean by wait? It certainly doesn't sound like passive resignation.
The material we analyzed is emphatic on this point. This waiting is not passive. It is active, expectant trust, coupled with courage. It means anchoring yourself in the confidence of verses 1 through 3, maintaining the desire of verse 4, and clinging to the assurance of verse 10, all while performing the righteous conduct of verse 11.
So it's an engaged waiting.
It is choosing to remain hopeful, alert, and committed to God's process while confidently expecting His intervention in His timing. It's the very opposite of agitation and worrying.
So the command is, be active in your waiting. And the consequence of this courageous waiting is an internal divine provision.
Exactly. The command is followed by the promise, and He shall strengthen thine heart. As we actively trust, endure, and refuse to yield to fear, God provides the supernatural internal resolve necessary to navigate the siege, the betrayal, the uncertainty.
Which reminds me of Isaiah.
Yes, this principle is famously reinforced in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 31. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint.
The practical takeaway here is that our responsibility in trials is twofold. We must be courageous in faith, and we must actively wait with confident expectation. And the strength needed to perform those actions is provided by God.
That is the beautiful exchange laid out in Psalm 27. We supply the active trust. God supplies the internal power required to sustain that trust. This psalm moves us from theoretical confidence to practical, enduring faith.
This has been a profound deep dive. We started with the question of securing unshakable confidence in a fearful world. David answered by defining God by his titles, light, salvation, and strength. We end with the command to actively wait, fortified by the knowledge that seeking God's presence is the one thing that guarantees internal stability.
Indeed. The entire structure confirms that true faith, as detailed by the insights from the You Need Faith in Jesus team, is rooted in the unchanging sovereign character of God. This sovereignty both saves us from our enemies and instructs us how to live with integrity in the midst of them.
The ultimate takeaway here is that David's courage came from placing his focus on the eternal, beautiful presence of God from verse 4, rather than the temporary hostility of his enemies in verse 3. The single greatest defense against despair is the pursuit of divine fellowship.
And to offer a final provocative thought. Consider the profound connection between verse 4, seeking God's presence as the one thing, and verse 14, finding strength while waiting. It's not simply waiting for a solution, but waiting in the presence we have already secured.
So the waiting itself is transformed.
Completely. If we have the light, we can endure the dark. If we have a stronghold, we can endure the siege. The waiting becomes productive because the source of light and strength is already internalized.
That is a truth worthy of reflection, a powerful way to frame endurance. And remember, to solidify your understanding of this lesson, be sure to use the flashcards to review key terms and then take the quiz. Passing the quiz will mark this lesson as complete.
Thank you for joining us on this deep exploration of Psalm 27. May your heart be strengthened as you wait actively on the Lord.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.